was a couple. It's an African-American couple, and I don't know, there was something, I think in their local church culture, I don't think it was an African-American thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But almost the first thing they said is adoption's off the table. We will not consider adoption, so don't even go there. Right? She said the reason, they said, was because in their community, which I think was their local church community, there's a very high value placed on being pregnant and giving birth to, quote, your own child. Okay? Now, her husband he had had the mumps when he was a kid, and I'm not exactly sure how you treat the mumps. I didn't think you did. But for some reason, it wasn't handled correctly, and one of the consequences of that is complete infertility. I mean, he is producing 0 sperm. And here's the comment she made. They started to tell their story, and she said, "We can't get pregnant, and it's his fault," and pointed right at it. Right? Now, against my better judgment, well, we continued the conversation. Right? My better judgment was to say, we stop right here and you guys go to marriage counseling and then we come back. Right? Because she was beating on him unmercifully to accept a sperm donor. And he didn't want to. And you could tell, it was one of those situations where she looked at him and said, it was that look that said, you go with this or your life's going to be miserable, type of thing. And so I suspect at the end of the day what happened is that he sort of said, "Oh, okay, I'll accept the sperm donor," with her twisting his arm. Okay? But he really didn't like the idea that somebody was going to pinch hit for him in this, what he considered to be a really important role. Okay? Wants you to be able to help them navigate that. Okay? Here's the reverse of this. These are dear friends of mine. And he was kind of a Peter Pan figure that he's had a tough time growing up and facing reality. And so he was in his late 30s when they got married, and it took them a while, and by the time they started really getting serious about having a kid, she was in her early 40s. And their obstetrician was saying, you got no chance of conceiving without an egg donor. But this time, she was the one who really wanted to do it. And he was the one who had reservations about it. And so I'm sitting with him across the lunch table trying to help him navigate this with his wife. Right? I want you to be able to help them with this. Right? Here's the third.
So for her, was it important that she experienced pregnancy?
Not as much. But there was no reason. The concern was about the age of her eggs, not her ability to carry a child.
Right.
Because your ability to carry a child is not nearly as age dependent as you know. I do know what happened to that couple. Because they said no to an egg donor, and they actually conceived 2 children naturally when she was in her early to mid 40s. They have these 2 gorgeous little girls at the moment. The first one, I'm not so confident about that. I don't know what happened to them. This one was tragic. They've been trying for 6 years, finally conceived through IVF, got halfway through the pregnancy with triplets, miscarried them all, nearly died in surgery. She had a massive uterine hemorrhage, nearly died on the operating table, emergency hysterectomy. I mean, she's done, and they have 5 embryos in storage. And they want to know if it's okay to hire a surrogate. Basically, they want to know if it's okay to rent a womb. As they put it, to incubate their children. Right? That one's a little more challenging, I admit. But these are the kinds of dilemmas that you routinely see. Now, you also get, brother, what you were referring to, which are gay and lesbian couples who have become some of the biggest customers of reproductive technology. You also have what's called the SMC phenomenon, single mothers by choice, who, women who basically don't need a man or are tired of waiting for men to get with the program, and they decide to sort of launch off and do this on their own. I don't hear about men. There's no single fathers by choice. I don't hear much of that. But it's created, all of the technological options that are available have created this incredible array of potential complications that can come up. And so it's really important that we be able to help people navigate this. Okay? Now, let me go back to the beginning of this and touch on the pastoral side. Okay? So you've got a couple, let's say they've been trying for 4 years, which is an eternity in this area. And they are sitting across the table from you over coffee. They've just been to the local infertility clinic. How many of you are writing on this, by the way? Okay. That's it. The rest of you are cowards for not doing this one. And they have just been to the local infertility clinic, and they have been given artificial insemination, IVF, sperm and egg donors, and various forms of surrogacy and sperm injection, all of these things as possibilities. Okay? And what they want to know is, what your advice is. But first, you have to sort of deal with them pastorally. Okay? So what kinds of questions would you raise for them? How would you minister to them pastorally? Here's what almost all of these platitudes have in common, is that they minimize the pain of infertility. They trivialize the pain. Don't ever do that. I don't think I've mentioned this to you guys already. Stop if I'm having a senior moment, and stop me if I have. But I asked my wife a few years ago, in 2006, she had breast cancer with double mastectomy, full chemotherapy, I sat with her on the edge of the bathtub while she's pulling out clumps of her hair. It was a year from hell. And I asked her, and she had been, by the way, she's fine today. So we just hit the 5-year mark, so we're good to go. I asked her about 2 years into it. She basically sort of recovered. She went through this for a year and then took another year to recover from it. And it took us another year to recover financially from it. But I asked her, what was harder, the breast cancer thing or the 3+ years of infertility that we dealt with? And guess what she said? Without hesitation. Infertility. She said, it's not even close. Now that tells you a lot. Because losing all of her female parts didn't compare to the threat of losing the dream, of having a child. And we were caught completely off guard by how painful this was. Neither of us expected the shot that our gender identity would take. We quit going to church on Mother's Day and Father's Day. Those were the two worst days of the year by far. And we finally got my church to acknowledge infertility on Mother's Day. So grateful. Please do. You guys, you got to do that. You got to acknowledge, no charge for this, but you got to acknowledge that Mother's Day is not a holiday for everybody. For a variety of reasons, this being one of them. And she quit going. I mean, she couldn't go to baby showers. She quit getting invited to them. All our friends seemed to be multiplying like rabbits at the time. And the contrast, because and we did this too, but all their friends wanted to talk about was, babies and diapers and stuff related to kids. So she actually quit hanging out with many of her best friends because it was just too painful. I would say short of losing a child, infertility is about up there at the top of the list. This is why couples really bristle when they hear pious platitudes. That sound like, I know you were just teasing, but that sound like, get over it. Stop whining. I never envisioned that sex would become a chore, but it did. And I did get tired of her calling me to come home. That was nuts. And we had one day a month when she was a mess. And if I had night class during that time, it was so much the better. So just really be careful about this. The pain is off the charts on this. And if you haven't gone down that road, I think it's really hard to identify with. And I know in some cultures, I think it's even harder to go down that road because of the expectations. It seems to me that there's less support in some of our local church cultures. Could be wrong about that, but my impression I get from talking to students, particularly of various Asian descents, is that walking this road is much tougher in some of those contexts. It breaks my heart to hear that. I would really encourage your church to have some sort of support ministry for infertile couples. That's really important, because what happens often is that the men don't like to talk about it, which means that frequently the women suffer alone. And just statistically, 1 in 6 couples of childbearing age are technically infertile. Now think about that. That's a lot of folks. And I guarantee you they are in the pews of your churches. Now they may not be talking about it. We may, in our desire to promote marriage and family in our churches, we may be inadvertently alienating couples who are really struggling to have children. And as a result, really struggling with their faith. that shouldn't be a huge surprise that they would also struggle with their faith at this time. So what do you do? Well, I would suggest not giving advice unless it's asked for. Or at least, maybe put it a little differently. Maybe to ask permission before you give advice. I'm assuming in the case that you'll be writing on that they've come to you asking for your advice about what to do. But there's a lot of walking with couples and praying with them and weeping with them and just sort of doing life together with them and letting them talk about it as they want to. I would let them set the agenda. And I'd be careful too that we define infertility correctly. Because some couples, they'll try for a couple months unsuccessfully and panic, thinking they're infertile, and they're not. It's, the definition of infertility is you've been trying for 12 consecutive months unsuccessfully. And most infertility clinics will tell you, come back after you've been trying for a year. So I would say, until, if it's just in the first few months, then I'd say that, there's nothing to panic about, at least not yet. I'd say maybe after 6 to 9 months, there's probably some merit in particularly the woman, being checked out. Just to see if there's an identifiable problem. Having a sperm count done for the guy is not hard to do. But just to have the medical checkups done and taken care of, because that's the first thing I'd want to ask them. Do you know if there's a medical problem? About a third of cases they don't know. There's nothing identifiable. They just can't conceive. Please don't tell them to don't stress out so much. Stress probably does have something to do with it, but telling people to reduce their stress just gives them more stress about reducing their stress. Okay? And don't ask questions that are none of your business. Like, when's the last time you went on a romantic weekend? Friends asked us that. I said, since when is that any of your business? People actually ask us, how much time do you spend in the hot tub? I thought, really? That's your business? Come on. But the sort of the big idea is, the pain is real and it's huge. And don't discount it. Right? Don't pretend that you get it either, unless you've walked down that road. You don't have to get it to minister effectively. It helps, but you don't have to get it. If you want to put them in touch with another couple who's walked down this road, that's usually really helpful. Okay? Make sure the couple has, responded to it appropriately. Because some couples at the end of this, they're embittered and they divorce, and their faith takes a hit. Don't get them around those couples. Okay. But some couples, they've come to terms with it. They've adopted. Some couples adopt and then they conceive naturally. I wouldn't recommend that as a treatment for infertility. because that's anecdotal at best. But there's a lot that we can do to really minister effectively. And I'd say every time we talk about marriage, children, and families in our churches, it behooves us to acknowledge that there are single adults in our midst, that there are married without children. There are some people who have decided to be single for kingdom purposes and decided not to have children for kingdom purposes. Okay? Both of those are biblically consistent options. Amen? Okay? We'll get to the single part later. But just be careful. I remember my wife described our church when she was going through this as really insightful comments she made. She said, it feels like in our church that there is a cult of motherhood in our church. And that her status as a godly woman elevated significantly once she was pregnant. Which bummed me out a little bit because her status didn't elevate nearly that much by virtue of being married. It was a lot more by virtue of being pregnant. But there's something that is not quite right with that picture. I suspect that a lot of our churches have cults of motherhood in them. And I think they betray the biblical idea that we are complete in Christ. Period. End of story. Right? And I'm not always persuaded that we believe that. That we don't need anything else to complete us, spouses or children, spiritually speaking, because by virtue of being complete in Christ. So just as a word of admonition, when you talk about marriage and family, please acknowledge that you have lots of people who don't fit the mold. You know, in California now, the majority of households are headed by non-traditional married couples. Married couples have fallen to heterosexual married couples have fallen to less than 50% of the households in California now. Okay? All right, you guys have questions you want to raise about the pastoral dimension on this? Are you afraid to talk to an infertile couple now? Let's hope not. Let's hope not, because they need the support and the love and encouragement that the church has to offer. There's not a lot of gift or zift being done today. It's almost all IVF specifically. Gift, I'm not exactly sure why gift is not being done as often. But I'm told that it's almost all IVF in that family of technologies. IUI is something you can do. You probably could do that at home if you were so inclined. I wouldn't recommend that, but that's neither expensive nor particularly high technology. So you can probably do IUI I'd say you can probably do that for under $1,000. Donor eggs will cost probably about $5,000 for a donation. We should really call it women selling their eggs because they're not being donated at all. And you can, in fact, what's that? One harvest of eggs, which is as many as you can produce in one cycle. And the record I've heard so far, I heard of one woman who was donating her eggs that produced 60 in one cycle. That's about what was the look on my face too when I heard that. That's 5 years worth.
That's because of the hormone?
Right, right. All right, and just if you minister on a college campus, you'll see the ads for egg donors. And if you have children and you're in the pediatrician's office and get those family magazines, you'll see ads for surrogates and egg donors. And some campus newspapers will actually pay more money if you meet certain criteria. I think I include the Brown University one in the reading. $75,000. If you were, I think it was 6 foot or above, which rules out most women, blonde and blue-eyed, athletic, and an SAT score of 1,400 or above. Now you think, who would have the audacity to put that ad out, knowing that it takes two to get together on this? And so, if I'm the husband of that couple seeking that egg donor, I am really hoping that I don't screw this thing up. Which, that's a distinct possibility that very few of those egg donors' traits will come through. And if you just Google, egg donation, you'll come to some sites where the couples can actually pick out the woman who will be their egg donor. That's in a registry. So you ought to explore the internet on this. It will blow your mind to what's there. Go on the site of an infertility clinic and just sort of rummage around there and see what's available is absolutely staggering. Okay. No other questions? Yes.
Just you kind of talked about financial, how much it costs the first year. I'm just
Okay. Yeah.
interested in what
Okay.
the rest of the
Yeah. No, it's a good question. Getting a sperm donor. You can if a woman wanted to do the single mother by choice, she could probably do that. Without labor and delivery, that's probably $2,000. She could do that. IVF runs about, I'd say somewhere between, you probably can't get an IVF for less than $15,000. That's per cycle. I've heard we had a Talbot student about a year or two ago. They signed on with an infertility clinic for $25,000. They'd give them 3 cycles. And if none of those 3 cycles succeeded, they'd get their money back at the end. But if you hit the jackpot on the first try, you still pay $25,000. Surrogacy is a quantum leap forward. Some states, the states that allow it, most of them cap the fee. Fee is generally about, I'd say, $25,000 to $30,000 for the surrogate, plus usually a matching amount will go to the broker who finds the surrogate and monitors the agreement. And a gestational surrogacy also requires what technology? IVF is required of that, right? Okay. So there you're probably another 15 at least, and then generally the couple's also paying for labor and delivery expenses, which their insurance will not cover. Okay, so it's about, you're probably at somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000 for a gestational surrogacy, unless you outsource it. And you can get a surrogacy in India, for example, for about $5,000, which has spawned. This is part of the whole what makes this area so interesting. It spawned the term that we call this now reproductive tourism, where you travel to other parts of the world looking for donors and wombs for real cheap. I mean, and that $5,000 for a woman in India will buy her a house for cash.
So that's exclusive of the IVF also?
Yeah, that's right. That's the surrogacy fee only. Okay. Now, no charge for this, but some countries that don't allow surrogacy, if you outsource it, they put up obstacles to you bringing your child back. There have been a number of celebrated stories. They've eventually gotten in, but it's a lot more difficult. Sperm injection, I don't know what the latest cost of this is. My last understanding was that added about $20,000 to the bill, but that's unverified as of today, so I don't know for sure about that. Okay, other questions on that? We all clear on what we're talking about? The only technology that is not up here is sort of connected with IVF, and it's not, and the reason it's not up there is because technically it's not a procreative technology. It's technically not procreation. It's a form of adoption. But just as you can adopt children that are newborn, you can also adopt embryos that are on the verge of being discarded or that are no longer wanted by their genetic creators. And there's, if you Google when you get home, the Snowflake program. They're just up the road in Fullerton, and it's part of a Christian adoption agency that is the leading embryo adoption place in the world today. It's run by a couple of Christian guys. It's in Fullerton, yeah. It's Nightlight Christian Adoptions is the adoption. They've been doing traditional adoptions for years. And at last count, it's been a while since I've checked it, but at last count they had facilitated 200-300 embryo adoptions. So just, again, rummage around on the Snowflake program and you'll kind of see what they do.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.